Showed you yesterday a problem with Labor's so-called green dream of the renewables transition. It's an abandoned solar farm at Gemelong, not far from Forbes in central western New South Wales. The farm's owner, Vast Renewables, went into administration last year, leaving the plant to go to rack and ruin. And locals are up in arms. They're concerned about the bushfire risk and, of course, public safety. The story attracted the interest of the Shadow Minister for Regional Development, Anne Webster, who joins us live from Mildura. Good to talk to you again, Anne, and congrats in hanging in the Shadow Cabinet. Now, we know there's a lot of concern about the renewables rollout in regional areas, but there aren't too many examples of abandoned projects like this one, are there?
Well, let's wait and see, Chris. Great to talk with you again. Mallee has many, many projects, and in fact, across Victoria, we have 21 of the largest foreign-owned wind and solar developments who've pulled in almost $5 billion in revenue and consumer subsidies. Who's paying those subsidies? Us.
Yeah.
And then today we find out that there's one of those foreign-owned companies, Iberdrola, which is developing the VNI West in my patch and owns other renewable developments. And they brought in over $600 million in 2023-24 and apparently paid no tax.
Yeah.
Where's the transparency? And then we've got Energy Connect, who have gone over budget, shock horror, $1.1 billion over, and they've now applied for us to pay. Where does this stop, and how many businesses will go under and leave properties just like the one you showed last night?
Well, this is the worry, isn't it? There's so many taxpayer dollars involved in this, so many subsidies. For instance, we know a heap of hydrogen projects have sucked up the government subsidies and then they've scrapped them. So obviously our money disappears there on some of that. We don't get it all back. There must not be the incentives there either. When people have built these renewables plants, once they've got the subsidies, maybe they're not so interested in running them. Maybe they're happy to see some of them go to rack and ruin.
Well, I personally think that there should be a bond-like process that applies to mining where sites need to be rehabilitated at the end of the mine life. There needs to be more responsibility taken by the companies and certainly by the government to ensure that taxpayers are just not bleeding out of their pockets dollar after dollar after dollar. My daughter showed me her energy bill today, $784 for 1 month. 1 month.
Wow.
Young family, 4 kids. This is crazy.
Well, this is the point, right? The company that's gone bust here, Vast Renewables, they've soaked up $300 million in taxpayer subsidies. Now, not for that specific solar farm, that's just one small venture, but for others as well. Yet this solar farm, we're short of energy. We're told the renewables are the cheapest form of energy, yet it wasn't, obviously, it couldn't trade through and it's gone to rack and ruin. What's happened to all the subsidies and why doesn't the solar farm work, or why isn't it worth keeping in operation?
Absolutely. Excellent questions. I think there need to be some FOIs about all of these businesses and the taxes that they're not paying. Twiggy Forrest, hello. Australian dollars, our dollars, hard-earned, and are going towards these projects. And look, my farming community is still absolutely and rightfully angry about the process that the Victorian government has taken them through and taken away their rights. This is a schmozzle. There is no other way to describe it.
Well, it's sad when you see just these solar projects when you are flying around the country and these massive solar farms that are popping up, and they absolutely are a blight on the landscape. And if you love the Australian landscape, and who doesn't, well, except possibly greenies, because they never get out to the country. Why would you want to destroy this beautiful scenery with things like solar farms or wind farms?
Well, a scenic vista used to be regarded as part of the environment. Apparently now it isn't. We have ridges covered in these wind turbines. We have prime agricultural land in valleys covered by solar panels. And what we don't hear from the Greens is the long-term effects of the pollution. For example, solar panels leak out cadmium telluride. They leak out lead. These go into the soils. That's left there. It doesn't leach out. When we get rid of solar panels, we leave a huge environmental disaster behind. And these are areas which later we might want to use for growing food. In the case of wind turbines, they pollute very large areas with extraordinary dangerous chemicals. And instead of trying to dispose of these wind turbine blades, we bury them or we cut them up and bury them. And there is no industry at all where we can recycle these. So these are the worst possible decisions we could make for electricity in this country. We have plenty of energy. It is cheap energy. And there's nothing wrong with putting plant food into the atmosphere. There's nothing wrong with feeding the plants. Whereas these alternatives to energy, wind and solar, actually destroy plant life.
Now, finally, a regular on this program, Alex Epstein, he does a fantastic job highlighting some of the climate catastrophizing, he calls it, where these global warming activists, scientists make all sorts of doomsday predictions that, of course, never come to fruition. Remember, one of these was acid rain. It was going to kill all of us, Ian, acid rain. Let me read this extract from the New York Times to remind our viewers about what damage acid rain was going to do. Rainfall with an acidity level of vinegar has been reported in widely separated areas of the earth in recent years, and the trend towards more acidic rain has been accelerating. This is all from the New York Times. Back in 1979, Ian, what happened to acid rain? Why isn't it an issue anymore?
Well, it's like all these catastrophe scare stories. They are blatantly wrong, and they're demonstrably wrong, and the science is wrong. Rain is acid. It always has been acid. We can measure it. And as soon as that acid rain hits rocks or hits the soil, it gets converted into slightly alkaline material, which then ends up in the oceans. The acid rain story.
There is no other way to describe it.
We were going to lose all the forests of Europe. Now, these forests did not get destroyed. What is destroying them now?
Way to describe it.
And solar farms in areas where there's very little wind, and solar areas in high latitudes where you've got very little sun. So these great scare campaigns have all shown to be wrong. We've had 2,000 years of people telling us the world's going to end by some great catastrophe. Now, if just one of these got it right, we wouldn't be here.
Nuts is when we use taxpayer dollars like Obama's $2.2 billion solar plant in California that had to close after years of wasted money. I see solar working on somebody's home because it gets rid of the transmission lines and it can supplement their energy uses. But when you have these $2.2 billion solar plants, I mean, they just had to shut it down.
Well, yeah, Google's Ivanpah plant was a disaster from the start. I've been writing about this since 2014 when it opened. It's really just an inefficient gas plant masquerading as a solar plant. It has outdated technology now. It has killed tens of thousands of birds who, when they fly through the field of mirrors, just literally burn. They're called streamers. And it's just another example of green junk. All this stuff is green junk. The Eiffel Tower-sized offshore wind turbines, Ivanpah, even the solar on homes. Taxpayers have to pay for that. That stuff it takes 20 to 30 years for those solar panels to pay off, and taxpayers are paying for that.
And environmentalism shouldn't be a dirty word because people do care. You know, conservatives are conservationists, and they actually care about the wildlife. And these Democrats and these liberals, they don't care about wildlife. They don't care about like preserving nature. They only care about control and power and the grift, because Ivanpah was called a prolific executioner of wildlife, and it's a travesty. Steve Malloy, great to see you.
We all know how they sell the so-called green energy transition, don't we? I mean, they don't tell you about the endless hikes in your power prices, and they don't tell you about how unreliable our energy supply has become, and they don't tell you about the land alienated, the bushland cleared, and the farming families surrendering the rights to their own land. No, they sell the green dream with sweetness and light. They sell it as part of a grand green dream, just like this video from the Clean Energy Corporation.
It's now 10 years since we began investing in Australia's transition to net zero emissions. We can all be excited and inspired by the seismic shift that's occurring right now. However, it must continue at an even greater scale.
Well, of course, it's wonderful and we've got to keep going, they say. But have a look at how it sometimes turns out. This is a solar farm, or what's left of a solar farm at Gemelong, not far from Forbes in central western New South Wales. The farm's owner, Vast Renewables, went into administration last year, and as you can see, the plant has gone to rack and ruin, leaving the locals none too pleased.
This is not just rubbish laying here. There's the huge amount of money that's gone into this thing that's now just evaporated in smoke and taxpayer subsidy.
Yeah, sure enough, there's plenty of your money involved. Before it went bust, Vast Renewables attracted hundreds of millions of dollars in government grants and subsidies for various renewables projects around the country, many of which have fallen over. You can see here what the Gemelong solar farm looked like a few years ago, and you can see how it looks now, how your taxpayer subsidies turned out in the real world. Locals are worried about the abandoned site left behind and the risk of bushfires, especially after a fire last year at the Wellington solar farm, a short drive to the east.
The firefighting aircraft over the back there water bombing, 2 helicopters. Unbelievable.
This is a real worry, isn't it? A legitimate fear. The green dream gets a big run in the media and in politics, and it attracts countless billions of your dollars. But the renewable energy reality is something entirely different to the spin.